Today is December 11th, 2008. My name is Judy Showalter, and I'm here with Michael Thompson from the class of 1964. Also with us today are Lori Preston and Sarah Hendrick. We're here as part of the Living Legacy Oral History Project. Can you you're from Florida. How did you hear about Randolph-Macon College?
Great question. I anticipated this. I went to boarding school in Rome, Georgia, a school called Darlington, and it's very Georgian, southern, southeastern prep school. And I had an English teacher my senior year, and he said that he was a graduate of Randolph-Macon. And I thought, gee, I want to go to college in Virginia. So I started talking to him, and he said that he had gone here, graduated in the 1940s, met his wife here, not at the college, but in town. She was a lady from in town. And I really admired this English teacher. He's one of those people that, is the key person, that kind of one of those influential people in your life, and he certainly wasn't mine. And so he put me in touch with Randolph-Macon. I got the catalog and read through it and thought, this is where I'd like to go. So came to Randolph. I applied and came up. I said I came up in June after I graduated from high school. And my parents had picked me up, and our car was loaded down with stuff that I had, and I didn't want to send it home. So I sent it back. We just took it on up to the college here. And we arrived on campus and met Roddy Jones. He was the first person that I met here at the college, and a good person to meet for a first time on the campus thing. And he said, well, we really don't have space for storing these kinds of things. People usually bring their stuff, and we explained we were from Florida. And they knew that we were coming, so they created some space, and I left my trunk here and stuff like that. In those days you had trunks. So that's how I heard about Randolph-Macon, and that's how I happened to come here. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us about your impressions that first time you came up, other than meeting Roddy Jones?
I met a guy named, another guy who had great personality, and I want to say Lambeth Clark? Yeah, that's who it was, Lambeth Clark. And he was another person I met. So I got a very positive impression from people-to-people kind of relationship. And I think Roddy's and maybe Lambeth's office were in the old chapel, or I think it was the old chapel, sort of catty-corner to Mary Branch Dormitory. And it was where the radio station was. And but I don't know that those guys actually housed themselves there. It's just that was the general vicinity where we parked the car. And remember seeing the campus, and we toured the campus, and I thought this has a nice, comfortable feel to it. I wasn't looking for something that was massive. I was looking for something that was kind of intimate, and the college was, because I was coming out of a boarding school that was like that. And it was just a good step for me coming onto this campus and seeing it. I didn't think of the buildings as being old. I didn't think of them as being new. I think the newest building maybe on the campus was either Blackwell or some of the what do we used to call those dorms that are down the street here? The motels. That's right. We used to call them the motels. Yeah. So, yeah, I thought the campus, I didn't think it was particularly beautiful. I think it's much better looking now. I really do, in a nice way. It's developed nicely over the years. As you know, I'm getting ready to ask another question. But two of my children came here. And when my son came here, it was like coming home. And that was really neat. It was just, I'll show you around. He said, Dad, you don't need to show me around. But we did, And actually what we did, we came up here one time when he was about 10 years old. And we stayed in some truck stop motel down here between US 1 and 95. And we came up to the campus and we walked around. And I can't recall, we didn't come specifically to go to Randolph-Macon, but I said, while we're here, I said, let's go up to Ashland and we'll spend the night. So we did. And we walked around the campus, and I was really enjoyed showing things to Andrew and to my daughters too, and to my wife. She'd been to campus before, but the others hadn't. And then Andrew wanted to come back his junior year in high school and see the college. And that was kind of neat to be able to come back then. So it's been these kinds of connections throughout time that have brought us back to the campus. Yeah. You want to shoot with the next question, Judy?
That's okay. Can you tell us about arriving on campus as a freshman when you came back to go to school?
Yeah. Hurricane that came up the east coast of the United States and knocked down all the train signals, and I was coming up by train because my stuff was really here already. And they had to whistle stop the train for me to get off the train in Ashland. The train was late. I was late getting on campus. I missed the matriculation time that we talked about a little bit earlier, and went across the campus to find out where I was supposed to go, because I don't think I knew where Thomas Branch was, which is where I roomed. And I went to the Fidel House, and they kind of oriented me, and they got me matriculated. Jack Morrison, as I said, was the guy that helped me with that process, and then he got me over to Thomas Branch, where I stayed, of course, for my freshman year, and that was in shabby condition.
Close to condemnation at that
Yeah,
point.
I think it probably was. But we had a good time in that dorm. I mean, everybody, you had the wings, and it was U-shaped. I think they filled in the middle part now. I haven't been in it since they've redone it.
Oh, it's gorgeous.
So I need to really do that. We always talk about doing that sometime when we're on campus, and we just haven't. But I was in the U-shape, so I was facing the interior part. And you could yell out the window to the people across the way. And I remember right around the corner from me, but you couldn't get there from where I was. You had to go downstairs and go outside and then come in another door, because they had 3 separate entrances. And Larry Perrin, who was a fraternity brother of mine, who unfortunately was killed while I was a student here, and that's another story. But he and I were classmates, and I would yell out the window to Larry, and he would yell back to me, and we had these conversations going on. He was a bright guy. He lived up in Maryland someplace. But, yeah.
Well, I have to say, and you parked in the U.
Yeah, you did. But,
Which-
of course, I didn't have a car. But you did park in the U-shape. I mean, people did. And we had some upperclassmen, I think, living here in that dorm, but I'm not quite sure. I think we did. Perhaps they were the ones that just couldn't get rooms elsewhere. I don't know.
Well, we've had some people talk to us who got quite attached to it. I mean, even if they had the opportunity to live in a better room, they were very attached to Thomas Branch. We hear lots of stories.
Yeah, it had a life sort of to itself, and I can't recall what those lives are. It was neat. I mean, it was for a first-time person coming on campus, being in college. It was neat. Yeah.
Can you tell us about some of your relationships? Who were your roommates, and where did you live?
Okay. Well, I lived in Thomas Branch my freshman year, and a guy named Alfred Ankers was my roommate, and that was just assigned from, and I think he was from Newport News. And I can't remember who else was on my hall. I do remember Larry Perrin lived around the corner, and he was a good friend of mine. My second year I lived at Mary Branch. In Mary Branch South, I guess it faced College Street. And I love railroads, so we had a great room because I could sit there and watch the trains come through as I was studying at night and hear the trains rumble. I've always been fascinated with the railroad. And Hoy Steele and I were roommates. Who else was on our floor? Some guy named Jim Anderson, I think was his name. And Jim was kind of a funny guy. He and I we had to take these Bible classes, and from Dr. Terry. And Dr. Terry talked about some kind of some kind of plant or seed in the Bible, and Jim and I just took off on that and made all kinds of fun out of it, and because it was so silly to us at the time, and I guess it still is silly. I wish I could remember that. If it comes back to me, I'll call it out what we were talking about, what we would joke with each other about. And I stayed in Mary Branch for the rest of my time here because it was central to the life of the college. I didn't like going way down to the dorms. They partied pretty hard down there, and that was okay. I mean, I didn't have any problem with that, but I just liked Mary Branch. Seemed like a solid place. In senior year, I roomed with John Wolfe, and John, as a graduate of in 64, he was 65. So John would have. He was from New York, and he and I were fraternity brothers, and I guess I had sponsored him I think I was his big brother for a period of time to get him into the fraternity. I was a Phi Delt, and John was one of my buddies. Hoy was one of my buddies. Billy Wester, who was in my class. Macon Brock, who was in my class. Let's see, who else was in my class? Charlie Warren was in my class. These are guys that I've seen recently. Haven't seen John for a long while. Who else did I buddy around with? I mean, just the guys that were in my fraternity. Bill Tucker was our president for a period of time. I'd have to go back to the annual and kind of refresh my dull brain to take a look at all that, but and I'll do that if you want me to. Okay, all right.
I don't think we're going to run out of things to talk about.
Are we doing all right?
Yeah, just a quick question.
Yeah.
About how many trains do you think went through a day? I mean, how disturbing was it?
I don't know, but let me tell you what was disturbing. Probably, it didn't disturb my study.
Right.
It just, it became second nature, as it probably does for all of you. But I don't know, 20, 30, 40, 50 trains. It is the main line between the, Washington and Point South. But while I was here, 1962, I think, was the Cuban Missile Crisis. And I can remember, and all of us were just stunned by the amount of military equipment that we saw going through on special trains, going down to, defend the southeast coast. I mean, it was amazing, train after train after train, with all this military paraphernalia, guns and tanks and trucks and all this stuff. It was just, we were all mind-boggled. And I don't think any of us knew how serious that was at the time. I just don't think we appreciated it. But, of course, I was here when Kennedy was killed, too. And they canceled, that was in 63, they canceled classes for I think we canceled them for 2 days to honor his death and then to kind of watch his funeral. And that was a stunning time for us. It was very quiet on this campus. It was probably like 9/11 here, where everybody was kind of walking around, I'm sure, in a state of disbelief and shock and what's coming next and so on and so forth. And I can remember, and I was thinking of the terrible injustice of this. I had gone, as a lot of us did, we went to church on that Sunday following his being shot. And I can also tell you where I was the day and the time that I heard that he was shot. I was in my room taking a nap, and my roommate came in, John Wolfe. I was a junior. I would have been a senior. And John comes in and he says, the president's been shot. I said, oh, come on, John. He said, no. So we got it. We ran over to the Phi Delta house. And sure enough, everybody was gathered around the TV, and Walter Cronkite was on TV talking about the fact that Kennedy had been shot. I don't think he had died yet. So he was still sort of going between the incident from the book house to the hospital. But that was a sad time on this campus, and everybody, I think, really respected it. It had nothing to do with political party. It had a lot to do with our United States. But I digressed. And where was it before that? I'm trying to think of where. Oh, I was about the Cuban Missile Crisis. As I said, nobody knew how serious that was. Yeah. And the number of trains, we've talked about that, and I have no idea. But they used to whistle stop, as I told you, they whistle stop the train for me to get off. But at every Christmas, and I can't remember in the summertime. I think in the summertime on a couple of occasions, because I've worked up here, not on campus, but summer jobs in this area. I would always stand over here, which is a train that went down to Sarasota, and that's the train I always took. And a guy named Vance Mann, who was also a graduate of the class of '64, and I remember that now. He lived in Hamlet, North Carolina, and his father worked for the Seaboard Railroad. So Vance and I would get on the train at 9 o'clock. They whistle stopped it, and they hated to whistle stop the train because it took a long time to stop the train and then for it to maintain schedule. But Vance and I would get on the train, and we would go back to the club car, and we'd sit in the club car until it was about an hour or so outside of Hamlet, and then we'd go back up to where he was supposed to get off or where he was sitting, and make away. That was always fun. Vance went into Episcopal ministry too for a while. Mm-hmm.
I have to ask.
Yeah,
Whistle stopping is
an unscheduled stop.
okay.
It's an unscheduled stop.
Someone literally blows a whistle.
Well, they used to do it that way. The whistle
I
is
don't
the
mean
train
to-
whistle, I think. Yeah. What they did is I'd go over, I'd get my ticket at the train station, 2-3 weeks ahead of time to make sure that I had a seat on the train because I went by coach. And then I'd go over usually the day before. Of course, this was exam time going on. And I'd say to the train man, I said, "Now you make sure that train's going to stop tomorrow night." And you'd see it. You'd stand out on the side, on the platform, and you'd see the train coming down the tracks. And it wasn't a freight. You knew it wasn't a freight. And because it was generally on time. And you thought, dear God, is that train going to stop or not? But it always did. It never overran the stop. And, of course, coming back up here, when I'd take the train back up, it came in about 5:30 in the morning. And that was always a pain to have to, get up and get off the train then. But I'd go on and go to class because I always timed it in such a way that I'd get back on campus to go to the 8 o'clock class that I had or the 10 o'clock or whatever it was.
The Silver Meteor won't whistle stop anymore.
Not in Ashland, it does at.
You have to go down to Staples Mill.
Staples
It whistle
Mill.
stops there, actually, kind of.
Oh, is that right?
Not
Really?
really a scheduled
Yeah.
Stop. It only stops if they've sold a ticket.
Yeah.
That's the one that goes all the way to Miami.
It is.
Is that the one that showed up to New York something like 36 hours late
Probably.
last year?
Probably. The way they treat railroads now is pathetic. It leads the passenger service. It's awful.
It is. It's hard.
James was only 20 minutes late, you said?
Oh, that was amazing. I had to pick someone up there last week before.
At Staples Mill?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Off the Silver.
This is an aside, you can cut the recorder off of this, but
Okay.
it doesn't make any
Trains,
difference.
too.
All right, my wife and I went to New York for Thanksgiving a couple of years ago because we swap it around with our kids. I mean, one year we have Thanksgiving and they have Christmas elsewhere, and then we just flip-flop it because otherwise it just gets crazy. And so we decided that one Thanksgiving we'd go to New York. My wife and I did. So our Thanksgiving dinner were sandwiches sitting on the train going up to New York. And we got up to New York in no time at all. And when we got to the train station, we got on Staples Mill. The guy said, for $36 more, he said, you can come back in the Silver Meteor in the bedroom. And I thought, oh, that sounds good. So we did. I said, I went back and talked to Joanna, and she said, oh, let's do it. So and I'm glad we did, but we had this bedroom coming back, and we could sit there and kind of relax, and we had bought a lot of stuff, and you didn't have to worry about somebody coming along and taking it, and we got a free dinner out of it. But we were supposed to get into Richmond at 9-something in the evening, and it was more like 10:30, 11 o'clock by the time we got into Richmond. I could have been a railroad man. I really could have been.
And we get a lot of train stories,
I bet
and
you, do you?
and personally curious about the Mary Branch in that I lived in every corner of Mary Branch South, so we probably lived in the same room. What about other activities? You've mentioned your fraternity. What were some of the other we'll talk about academics too, but what were some of the non-academic activities?
Well,
extracurricular, not
right.
non-academic.
Right. Well, I mean, I worked on the annual for a couple of years, and Billy Jacobs, a fraternity brother of mine, and also lived down the hall with me. I should say that because so we worked on the annual together, and I did the fraternity section, and then I was an associate editor, whatever that means. It was just a nice title. We worked hard to get pictures and to make sure that everything was really precise and so on, and all our information was correct. And to try to meet deadlines, get other people to meet deadlines. If you've ever done anything like that, you know what the kind of pressure they put on you to make sure it gets done. And that was a fun project, and it was a year-long project. I mean, it just, from beginning to end. And so I did that, and I served on the Student Senate, and really can't recall a whole lot of what I did with that, but it was kind of fun. I mean, it was an elected position, and somebody thought enough of me to elect me. Not like the governor of Illinois. Yeah. But
No scandals.
no scandals that I know of.
Didn't buy that.
Didn't buy the post. What else did I do? I used to sing in the men and boys choir at the Episcopal Church here, which was kind of fun. And that was on Sunday evenings. We sang evensong, and it was kind of new. And I've always loved music. I sang in the glee club of my boarding school, and I've always loved music. And that was very helpful to me in terms of the formation of my sort of career path. That and being on this campus. I mean, Randolph-Macon was probably a little more religiously oriented back then, and I wasn't looking for that. But, I mean, I think faith played a larger role back in the 60s for people than it does today. Not talking about religion, I'm talking about faith. But anyway, there was that, and I was in a journalistic fraternity. That was an honorary fraternity, but that came from my association.
Pi Delta Epsilon.
Yeah, that was with that was in association with the yearbook, I think. Yeah, I think I don't know. I don't recall what else I did. Tell me,
Well,
and then
the other thing that I wrote down from what you had listed was the Canterbury Club.
Oh, Canterbury
which
Club, yeah.
I assume was
that was
a
like,
home for your non-Methodists?
Yeah, it was the home for the non-Methodists. That's right. That's what it was. No, Canterbury is an Episcopal college. It's not a fraternity. It's just it's a way of socialization, I guess. And yeah, I was involved in that. A bunch of us were. A guy named Bill Harrison, who I think teaches up at Mary Washington, was an English major here. And I have had a very difficult time. I did some classwork fundraising 2 or 3 years ago, and I took Bill. You got to self-select whom you were going to get in touch with, and I thought, well, I'll get in touch with Bill. He lived also in Newport News, and never could rouse him. Never could get a return phone call from him. And he's I guess he's just lost touch with the college. I think the only way anything's ever going to happen with him is for someone to go knock on his door. But Bill was in that, and I can't remember who else was in it. It wasn't a large group. But it was kind of a fun group. Yeah.
How about the academic side? How did you decide your major?
I don't know how I decided my major exactly. I wasn't sure what I was going to major in when I came here. My sister, who went to the University of Michigan, had majored in English. And I thought, if I want to go into the ministry, and I was beginning to think about that, the English kind of influence would be good because it was general enough. I didn't want to study religion. I mean, I did not want to do that. I wanted to do something different from that. And so I got here, and my freshman English teacher was Dick Wood, who was back on campus for this president's thing not so very long ago. and I just kind of liked him, and we resonated, and he seemed like a very interesting man who was knowledgeable, and so, I declared English as a major, and I think had I had Dr. Panel for some class my freshman year, I might have majored in philosophy. I did have a guy named Munyon, who I can't recall his first name. Merle, that's right, Merle. Yeah, Mumbles. Don't put that in there. I mean, well, you can. I'm sure.
I am sure that he knew.
I'm sure he probably did.
We've actually had a few other people refer to him
Okay,
that way.
but Mumbles Munyon, and I could have been a history major too. He wasn't terribly organized in his presentation, but he was good and thorough, and I appreciated all those things. But English became my major, and I'm not going to tell you that Dick Wood ended up being my favorite teacher. I think I had two favorite professors here, and one was Burnell Panel, because he was my philosophy teacher, and I took him my sophomore year for an introduction to philosophy, and I'll tell you a story about that in just a second. And my junior year for probably general philosophy, Aristotle and Plato and all those folks, and Socrates. And then my senior year, I took him for logic, and so I have two stories to tell you. The other professor that I had was a guy named Richard Cromwell, who came late in my college career. He may have come when I was a junior, and he was a graduate of Yale, and he taught the intellectual history of Western Europe. And the guy was excellent. I mean, he would come in and you'd sit down and you'd just start writing. My senior year, my last two exams were, one was in the morning, it was medieval history, Mumbles exam. And my second exam was that afternoon, it was in intellectual history of Western Europe. And Harrison Turner and I studied, I think that was his name, Harrison Turner. I think he became a doctor, and he and I were both seniors together. I think he was a KA. But we got together and we studied for the exam. And I stayed up all night because they were the last two exams of my senior year, and I thought, well, I got to get these things knocked away. So I took whatever pill you take to keep you awake back then. It was some kind of pill that kept me excited. And I got through the first exam fine, got into the second exam, and he wrote one question on the board, and I just didn't know what to write, didn't have a clue, so I just started writing, and I went into the class with an A and came out with a C. So it was not a good exam for me. But at that point, so what? Let's see. Oh, the two stories I was to tell you about Dr. Panel. And this involves this Bill Harrison too. We took this introduction to philosophy my sophomore year, and Bill and I both got D's at the end of the first semester. And we said, oh, we didn't think we were going to get D's. And I made a D. Throughout. I had a D in not every class, but every semester of the first 2 years I was here. And that was one of them. And so Bill and I vowed that we were going to make A's next semester because it was a year-long class. And by golly, we did. Next semester, we just banged it out. I can't remember the paper that I wrote, but I know I wrote a paper and I found it very engaging and very exciting to do and stimulating. And that's the kind of thing that Randolph-Macon does. That's what it lights fires. And it lit that fire for me. And my senior project was the same kind of way with Dick Wood, The other story about Dr. Panel is, and this was also my senior year, in the spring semester, it was a logic exam, and I studied very hard for it. I had an A going in, and I came out with a C in that because I forgot to study one particular section that was on the exam, and it just, I couldn't recall it, couldn't respond to it, couldn't handle it. I guess I hadn't mastered it yet. But anyway, that was my other story to tell. But I always respected Dr. Panel. He was a very good teacher, as was Dick Cromwell, and was Richard Wood. He was a good teacher too. He was a good teacher. Yeah.
How did you afford a Randolph-Macon education? You mentioned that you worked during the summers. Did you work or have a scholarship?
When I came to Randolph-Macon, I think the tuition was probably $1,100 or $1,200 a year, if you can imagine that. And by the time I graduated, it was $1,500 or $1,600, and that was getting tight for my father back then. And during the summers, the first summer that I was here, the summer of '61, I worked down in South Carolina with Jack Morrison and Bill Kyle. You probably know Bill Kyle. He's a Methodist minister. And he lives in Newport News. No, he lives in Williamsburg, as a matter of fact. And I don't see him, but I mean, but went to work for the Southwestern Publishing Company in Nashville, Tennessee, and we sold Bibles, of all things. And Rick Cook and Rick was a Phi Kappa, I think, and he was a graduate of class of '64. And his father, I think, was a Methodist minister. I don't recall, but I think he was. Anyway, Rick and I ended up in Gaffney, South Carolina, which was in Cherokee County, South Carolina. And we got back there and with our Bibles, and it's just wild country, and the people are wild, and why we weren't killed, I do not know. One time we decided we'd go follow up this dirt road. This is when we worked together, and we came upon a still. Well, we didn't know it was a still. And we pulled in, there were chickens running around the place, and they took us inside, and they showed us these bottles of clear, moonshine, and they probably thought we were moonshine agents, federal agents coming in. We didn't know where we were or why that happened. We left with our lives. It wasn't bad. I mean, they were gracious to us, and I don't think they chased us down the road. But I do recall going into another house where I got ready to sell a Bible. I stopped selling the Bibles and sold dictionaries. I really did. I just couldn't handle the Bible stuff. It was too much because people were buying Bibles. They didn't need Bibles. You'd go into these houses, they'd have 6 Bibles sitting out on their table. I'm serious. These were very poor people, and they thought, well, my value is in my religion or in my faith. And, they would take the insurance money off the wall, because the insurance man would come around and collect each week, and if you didn't have your insurance. And you were dealing with white people and black people. But this one house that I went to, I sold them a book, and I don't recall what book it was. And you'd sell the book, and then you'd go back and deliver it. And you ordered it. You spent the last 2 weeks making your deliveries. And I went up to the house to deliver the book, and they chased me out with a knife. Literally, they chased me out with a knife. But it was quite an experience. We bought this old car that was falling apart, had no floorboard in it, and so we got old license plates and tied them together, put them in the floorboard of the car, and had a radio that if you kicked it, it worked. And I got some red paint, and I painted the radio red. It was an old '51 Chevrolet is what it was. And I had to put a quart of oil in it every day to make it operate. And but Cherokee County, South Carolina, that was a different section of the country. Definitely. And are you from there?
I lived in Columbia, South Carolina.
Oh, did you?
For a while.
Okay.
I worked at University of South Carolina, and that part of the country was, upcountry was different.
Anyway, Randolph-Macon, I think, is responsible for that experience. I have to say, the whole thing. Didn't say anything about. And I can remember one other time I was trying to sell a Bible, and of course, being a good Episcopalian, we were talking, and I said, and I said something about the Trinity, and they said, well, we don't believe in the Trinity. And I looked at them, and I thought, oh well. So we got into this great big debate, and they chased me out of that house. They did. They really did. That was just awful. and I came back and I pulled out the Book of Common Prayer, and I started. There's a section in the Book of Common Prayer back then called the Great Litany, and I was looking and I thought, well, hell, pardon me. It said God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit. I said, surely that's the Trinity. Well, these non-Trinitarian Baptists down in the country just did not buy into that whatsoever. So,
You should write a book.
write a book. I haven't done it yet, but anyway. But Randolph-Macon really created those kinds of experiences. The next summer of '62, I went to Europe. And that was not as a result of Randolph-Macon, but my parents were going on. They took me on a trip to Europe, and that was fun. I mean, that helped me sort of come to appreciate the medieval history that I was going to be studying, because we saw England and lots of France and a little bit of Germany and some of Switzerland and a little bit of Italy, and that was good. And I can recall coming back through Ashland on the train at that time, and I had a girl that I was dating here in Ashland. And I called her on the phone from Washington, and I said, the train's going to be coming through. And I said, I'll wave to you from the train. So she was down there and waving when the train came through. That was funny.
Now, was dating local girls still called calicoing when you were in school?
I don't, never heard that.
Okay.
Never heard that. And I didn't date a lot of local girls. We would, on big weekends, you always had the girl that you were going with, if you were going with somebody, come to the campus, and that was always a big deal. And I was going with somebody my freshman year here and into my sophomore year. And then for other weekends, you would, I dated some girls from Mary Washington and RPI at the time. And those were essentially our sources for female companionship. And we better not talk about that any more than we did already.
We'll change it a little bit, because you said now you didn't have a car.
Oh,
So
okay. How did we do this?
How did you get to Mary Washington?
Okay,
How did
all
you
right.
get to RPI to meet
You
girls?
bummed rides. There was always an upperclassman. Your fraternity brother might be going down, and so you'd hop. Who had a car, and you'd go with them. One of my fraternity brothers, who was a senior when I was a freshman, was a guy named Jim Shields, and Jim was from Danville, I believe, and he had a convertible, and Jim and I became good buddies, and so I would go in the convertible to pick up the girls, and he never dated much. Strangely, he just didn't, and so he usually gave us his car to use, and we had the best car of all cars. But that's how we got around. Bill Tucker, who I had mentioned earlier, had a Studebaker. I can recall this green old Studebaker that he used to have, and we would borrow that car too. And there was a guy here named Bob Cushman who had a brother whose name I don't recall, but they were both Fidels. And Bob, I think, went into the Episcopal ministry. His father had been the dean of the Duke Divinity School, and which is, of course, Methodist. And Bob wasn't probably the best representative of being the son of the dean of Duke Divinity School. One night, he and I, and you probably don't want to, you can record this, but don't print it.
I'd be happy to turn it off.
Yeah, why don't you turn this
I'll
off,
be
because
happy
it
to do so.
I wouldn't want it to Okay, Judy.
Can you tell us what you did after graduation?
Yeah. I went to seminary. I went right from Randolph-Macon to Virginia Theological Seminary in Alexandria, and spent 3 years there. And my senior year, the Bishop of Virginia, because I had transferred my membership up to Virginia from southern Florida, and that's sort of the geographical areas of the way the Episcopal Church is divided. And I wanted to go to seminary from the Diocese of Virginia, and so I did. And the Bishop of Virginia, who at that time was a guy named Robert Gibson, had wanted me to go to St. Stephen's Church in Richmond, which is a great big church, and our daughter was married there, and that's where she goes to church now. Well, I didn't want to do that. I didn't particularly want to go to that particular church because the rector had a reputation of being a jerk, and I guess that's okay to say. Yeah, and so I won't say his name. But anyway, I just didn't want to do that. And I thought because it had been an academic setting so long, I really wanted to go into academic. And I went and spent an evening talking with the bishop that this is what I really wanted to do. And he said, well, okay, because you're really supposed to do what the bishop wants you to do when you get out of seminary and not do what you want to do. And the bishop was okay with that. And so I went and I interviewed after seminary, interviewed at two schools, actually three schools. One was St. Paul's School in Concord, New Hampshire, and the other was Groton in Groton, Mass., and the other was St. Stephen's, which was right across the street from the seminary, and that was a day school. And when I went up to interview at St. Paul's and at Groton, it had been snowing. This was in March. The snow was up to my shoulders. And I loved St. Paul's. It was just really, it had an English atmosphere of a school. It's a top prep school in the country. It was. I don't know what it still is. I guess it still is. Yeah. And so let me back up from that just a minute. When I came to Randolph-Macon, I wasn't a great student. As I told you, I got the D's. By the time I graduated, I was a Dean's List student for 2 years, and I was very proud of that. That was the other thing. So that, that was also a motivation for me. But came back and actually went to work at St. Stephen's in Alexandria, teaching English and sacred studies, and really thinking that I was going to go into to academics and headmaster and that kind of thing and get on that track. And a friend of mine that I'd been in seminary with, who had known me, well, not been, he was an instructor, but knew of me, and he said, Michael, I'd like you to come out and spend a little bit of time with me in parish ministry. So I went out to Winchester and met a guy named John Baden. I mean, this was the guy, and he was one of those other influential people, I would say, in addition to my father, Doc Register, who came here and told me about Randolph-Macon, my bishop, Robert Gibson, and John Baden were the most influential people in my life, because by working with John, I really sort of dropped the academic business and so went into parish ministry, and was in parish ministry until 1995, I guess it was, when I stepped away from that and went into development work to do fundraising, which was kind of fun. I was ready to get out of parish ministry. I mean, it's not as nice as what it sounds like for anybody who has ever been in it. You must be the daughter of a clergy person.
What? No, I'm a professional Christian educator.
Oh, you are? Okay. Well, you know what what goes on. Anyway, it was good to just sort of change. I never stopped being a clergy person, because I was assigned with St. John's in Charlotte, North Carolina, and thoroughly loved that. But I had more fun out raising money, and actually looked at Randolph-Macon to see if they could bring me on board here. And Ned, whose last name I can't remember, was Ned Moore. Yeah, was the director of development here, and he didn't have a spot for me, and he couldn't create a spot for me, and my children had come here, and I just thought it would be a good fit, and it probably would not have been a good fit in reality. But anyway, went from being a development officer and I would say a priest associate into retirement in 2002. Made the decision to do this in 2001 and committed myself to it in 2002.
And sometime in that period you married?
Oh, yeah. Oh, sure. Thank you. Yeah, when I was at St. Stephen's, teaching at St. Stephen's, I didn't know any girls up in Washington and wasn't dating anybody. And one of the other teachers there who'd gone to the University of Virginia and had dated a girl from Hood and was still dating her, said, oh, there's some girls that have rented a house in Washington in Georgetown, and he said, why don't you come in sometime? And so we went in, and I had a blind date with the girl that I ended up marrying, and it was just fun. We went, and I don't know whether this was prearranged or not, but the first time I saw her, I thought, this is the girl I want to marry. I really did, and that's quite literally true. I don't know that it was reciprocal from her, but had to work for it a little bit. But Georgetown, which was a place that was at the corner of M Street and Wisconsin Avenue, and it's no longer there. I mean, it's still a restaurant, but it's no longer there. But we ended up in a table about this size, and all the other people ended up a great big table. So Joanna and I spent 3 hours just chatting with each other, and it was just neat. It was fun. And so I sort of became their mascot for all these women at this house. I would, which was fun, all these hood girls. And we're still close to them. I mean, Joanna is much closer to her college classmates than I am to mine. And I don't mean that in a derogatory way. It's just, we have a lot of fun. We blend well together, and it's just kind of neat. And subsequently, we had 3 children. We had Andrew, who came to Randolph-Macon, graduated in 90. And then we had Claire, who came to Randolph-Macon and graduated in 95. And our middle child, Allison, didn't want to go to Randolph-Macon. She did not want to go to a private school. She wanted to go to a public school. As a matter of fact, she started out at Clemson, and she wanted to study medicine. And Clemson, being such a large university, throws everything at you, and she couldn't get focused on what she wanted to do. And so she said, I don't want to be here anymore. So she left Clemson, came up and finished up at Longwood, and is now a math teacher down in Colonial Heights.
You told us a little bit about how your son really liked Randolph-Macon and how he ended up here. How did your son
How did Claire get here? Or how did Claire get here? I honestly don't know. I think I mean, she liked Randolph-Macon from what she saw of it through Andrew, and she thought it might be a fun place to be. And we were living in Radford, and Radford was a small, very small town in southwestern Virginia, and the high school there was small, and I think there was a good comfort level there for her, and I think she felt like academically she could do the work, and so here she came. And our kids have done well. Our kids have done well. And what's so very interesting is that Claire, and this is the kind of thing you wouldn't have known, Claire ends up marrying a guy who graduated from Washington and Lee, but whose parents live out here on Ashcake Road. And we're good friends of the parents now. I mean, we weren't, but we are now. And it's just those little sort of coincidental things that kind of tie life together and make you know that you're part of a stream. And it's kind of wonderful. It's what you give thanks for. It's you go through dark periods in your life, but ultimately, when you start to reflect on it a little bit, you begin to realize that there's a great deal to be thankful for, and there's a great deal of value there that's very exciting and really very worthwhile. And I think my kids have gotten that, through Randolph-Macon too. I think they see that here, from here, yeah.
One thing we've heard from several folks who came when we were a men's college, who then had daughters come, and we've talked to a couple of them, actually. Was that odd to think that your daughter was attending your school? Did
Not
women
at
here
all.
seem strange?
Not at all, no, because there were women here they were day students. There was a girl, the one girl I can recall was a girl named Judy, and I can't recall her last name, but I'm sure she's in the annual there. But she was very bright and articulate, and I thought, God, if there were a bunch of these women here, I'd probably be really knocked way down on the totem pole in terms of academics, because they were very, but that was my first experience, other than having been in junior high, of being back in school with a woman again. Then I got to seminary, and we had women at the seminary, and they again were extremely bright and intelligent. Not that I ever thought that they weren't, but here you had an opportunity to see somebody of the opposite sex really shine and be challenging and intelligent and fun, and They were always fun, but
Now, when you heard that Randolph-Macon was going co-ed, how did you feel about
oh,
that
I was
at the time?
pleased. I was
Okay.
pleased. We had a girl in our parish in Winchester who, his name was Susan Arthur, and I think Randolph-Macon went co-ed in what, 71? 70 or 71? And Susan came here, and I was just tickled here. And I've lost touch with Susan. I don't know what she's doing now or where she is, but yeah, I was really pleased. And I think I wish it had been co-ed when I was here. I mean, that's the one thing that I could say, looking at the college now. I would have liked that experience. I've heard people from Hampton, Sydney say, well, you know, if you get to a chance with one woman and then there's somebody else that, you know, comes along and puts a sparkle in your eye, you know, that can make for close and difficult relationships. But, you know, we all have to work through relationship issues in life, and what a better way to do that than, and I don't mean that, I hope you understand what I'm saying by that, you know. I mean, it can be painful, but that's also a growing experience.
Yeah, and this is a safe environment to practice.
Yeah, really, yeah. I want to tell you a little bit about my mom. I don't know whether this is one of your questions or not, but about, you know, how she got into getting a scholarship here.
What was your mom's name first? Just to make sure.
All right.
it's
For the
on the
record.
Well, her full name is Beatrice Robbins, and that's her maiden name, and last name Thompson. And everybody affectionately called her B. And she was born in 1912. She was from New York City, from Manhattan. And my dad was from Staten Island, which is where I was born. And they met in the early 1930s during the Depression, and, you know, got married in 1934. And she never went to college. She went to a kind of business school, but not to college. And as time went on, you know, she saw how Randolph-Macon had sort of matured me, and how our two of her three grandchildren who had gone here, and she wanted to do something to honor us. And my mom was always a very generous woman financially, and so she said, I'd like to establish a scholarship here, and that's how the scholarship got established. She didn't really consult me on that and say, Michael, how would you like to have it done, or what would you like it to be for? She said, I want to honor you and Andrew and Claire in that. And so that's what it is, and we've chosen to continue to support that because I think it's important to do that, even in tough economic times. Yeah.
Does it have a criterion? Is it for?
You know, I'd have to go back and look at it again and see. I think it is for
I think I think it's a need-based scholarship.
need-based scholarship. That's
Tristan
what I was
Carr,
going to say.
incidentally,
Yeah.
who's a star
Yeah.
here on campus.
Yeah.
is-
We had dinner with him back in the spring, and I thought that last year's scholarship dinner was tops. It was really great. Thank you. Yeah. Oh, I didn't know whether you had anything to do with that or not, but don't change it.
That's her thing.
Don't change it. I mean, the others were kind of drab and sort of sit around and drink cranberry juice or apple juice. And you had, you know, you made it an adult function, and it should have been. And it was good. And the kids were there, they were dressed nicely, and we just had a good time. It was nice meeting him. And I kept saying to Tristan, oh, we'll get back this fall and come to a football game. We were going to come to homecoming, and I don't know, something came up, and I know we were
I'll
going out
arrange
to the
lunch-
mountains.
Lunch in the.
Yeah.
I think he's going away someplace exotic for J-term. I think
Okay.
Brazil.
We've got a group going to
There's-
Brazil.
Oh,
I think
really?
he's going to Brazil for J-term, but when
Well,
he
that
gets back
sounds
in
like a good place to
February-
go have lunch. Let's go there.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah, meet him when we're done.
Yeah.
We'll be the advisors.
Okay. All right.
chaperones.
But I mean, we certainly enjoyed sitting with him and talking with him, and
Fabulous kid.
we're happy to be able to assist in somebody like that's education. Yeah.
It's a nice award this year, a nice income this year. It makes a pretty big difference.
Thank you. Okay. What else?
Well, and that really was my last question. unless there are other stories that have come to your mind sometimes while we've been sitting here.
Well, let's see. One of the other extracurricular things you asked me about that now I recall is the radio station. Randolph-Macon used to have power. It was one of those kinds of things that came through the electrical outlet.
Hardwired.
Is that what it's called? Hardwired? Okay. Well, anyway, we decided, I say we, Bill Harrison and this other guy, whose name was Bob Fitz, who always wanted to become a Fidel, but for a lot of reasons did not become one. And, but we became radio announcers. And we worked under a guy named Ham Smith, who I think was from Stanton, Virginia, but I'm not sure. Lexington?
He's a professor at Washington.
Okay, all right. And I guess he was a junior or sophomore or something. Anyway, we became radio announcers, and we had this radio show that we did at 11 o'clock, whether we did it every night or every Thursday night or whatever. But it was just fun. We played nice music, and we just chattered back and forth. And one night, we were over there, and we did this sober, I have to tell you that. No, we were never over there, because we knew we would got into serious trouble if that had happened. But we got over there, and we got hung up on something very funny. And we must have laughed for 15 minutes before we could get ourselves under control to get, we'd flip the mic switch on and start to talk about it. And we'd break out because we would look at each other. We would just, how that laughter can be contagious. And that was one experience of the radio station that I can recall that was kind of fun. And I think I had a morning show, too, one day. I could have been a radio announcer, I think. People have often said, why don't you be a radio announcer? You've got the voice for it. But, instead I stood in the pulpit.
Now, we know a little bit about the radio station because, of course, it's in the annual, but we don't really know about the programming and the other kinds of
Okay.
things that were on. Was it music, or was it?
It was music and news. We had an AP machine in there. It was in the second story of the old, was it the old chapel or the old gym? The old gym,
Right.
that's where it was.
It was there.
And it was a second story there, and it was a studio about probably the size of that room and this room right here. It wasn't very large. But as I said, we had the AP machine in there, and we had to go in and always, preview the news. We'd give 5 minutes of news or 10 minutes of news, and then we had stacks of records there, and we would play Brubeck or whomever else was popular, and some of us listened to it, and probably mostly not many. I think one time we did get into some trouble. I think Frank Krim was the dean then, and I think we were panning him a little bit, and I think we got to some trouble for that, but I can't recall the specifics of it. So, and I wouldn't dare make anything up.
What were the call letters?
What were the
Well,
call
that
letters?
was what I was
I
gonna
think it was
ask you,
was it WRMC
Well, there's
or AVA?
WAVA.
Okay, that's what it was.
In your senior, but
It-
and
there's
what I'm
different
looking for
letters.
is the
There's
radio
different letters I've
station
seen.
because it's listed as
Yeah.
WRMB.
RMB.
Yeah, I've seen it listed.
Well, maybe
differently.
that's
And
what
that's
it
what
was.
I can't find it.
You
And
know-
that was one of my questions was
Okay.
your yearbook has two different sets of call letters.
It might have been it was probably WRMB. That would have made more sense because I guess it was my senior year. There was a radio station that opened off of Ashcake Road just before you cross the railroad tracks. I don't think it's there anymore. The tower may still be there. Is it still there? WHAM, all right. I think that was WAVA. I think that became WAVA. But I never announced there.
So I wonder if the hardwired RMC system was
I thought it was WRMB.
WRMB,
Yeah.
but at one point Randolph-Macon owned AVA and then lost
did?
that. And that's what I'm
Oh, I
wondering.
don't know. I honestly don't know.
Because we've seen two different sets of call letters, and this is the first time
Hmm.
somebody said that it was a hardwired.
Right. Which,
System.
Yeah, like a broadband.
Um,
RMB could be broadband.
But because you have to buy your other airtime, and I wonder if Randolph-Macon owned it,
Oh,
but
I
then
don't
didn't keep
think
it.
So I don't know. I don't think so.
Did
I'm
you
sorry,
have-
can I help you with
Did you
that?
have much of a budget or?
Don't know anything about the budget.
Okay.
Don't know anything about that. I know we had a panel that we had to
Right.
record to connect.
Did you guys bring bands to campus?
Oh yeah, that's a good story. Thank you for asking. They what was the name of the group? It was a group of 4 guys that sang, and the song they sang was "Bubbles, Bangles, and Beads," and I cannot think of the group that did that. But the IFC, the Interfraternity Council, had to go into Richmond and pick these guys up at the airport. So I said, "Geez, I don't want to do that." So Jim Shields convertible, I get Jim Shields convertible and go trucking into to the Richmond airport, which was then nothing like it is now, and we picked up, oh golly, we picked up the 4 guys. They were not the 4 freshmen. They were, 10 years ago I could have remembered, how your brain goes, but. And if I think of it, I'll send it to you on email. But I can remember bringing them out and how exciting it was. I mean, these were big time people. And I don't know whether Randolph-Macon does that kind of thing anymore or not. But these were big fraternity weekends. These were weekends when fraternities really was a 3-day party on the campus. And so that was kind of fun. And we had Count Basie here, I believe, one time. I think we did. Those are the 2
Did you have the
in Blackwell.
concerts in Blackwell?
Yeah, they
Okay.
were done in Blackwell, and it was always a big deal. I mean, it really was a big deal. Everybody would come. Most everybody had a date. I don't know what this football weekends. Camptown races was another thing that you may have heard about too, but that was in the spring. And that certainly was a party, and everybody came to that. You'd go out to some field way out.
All of Virginia was
Yeah,
around, wasn't
yeah. And everybody was tailgating, and how we ever made it back to campus, I don't know, but we did. And then we'd come back, and we'd have these rock bands come in, and in these old fraternity houses, and everybody was wall to wall, and you stood and partied and danced and just had a nice time. It was a lot of fun. Yeah, I wish I could remember the name of that group. Darn it.
I should go Google it.
Yeah.
The song name.
I say, or we'll look in the Yellow Jacket.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's probably, that would have been about 1963, probably.
You know,
We're laughing at you in your
most noble man
toga.
Thompson.
Oh, dear Lord in heaven, let me see that. Gosh, I'd forgotten
That's the last
about
picture I looked at because I
that.
went clockwise.
We're laughing
Oh,
at you
yeah,
in your
there I
toga,
am. Yeah.
being
All
crowned.
right. All right, this is Dick Heiner right here. Gee whiz, this must be the Fidel
That's the Fidel page.
page. Yeah, this is,
The Animal House.
Which is meticulously labeled, so I knew it was him.
you didn't name it the Animal House, did you? Did you really? Okay, that's fun. Anyway, I can't remember who was crowning me.
She's your sponsor. If you turn it back a page, it has her
really?
name.
That's nice to know.
She's-
Oh, Jenny Miro. I think that was Hoy Steele's girlfriend. Should have remembered that. Here's John Wolfe. Here's Charlie Wernham. Here's Billy Wester. I think it's Billy. Well, that might have been the band. No, that's the band. That's Edgar Garrett. I think that's Macon Brock and his wife Joan. Here's Skylar Miller over here. That might be Macon, I'm not sure. This was, his name was Tommy, I believe. I don't recall. His name was, I can't remember some of these guys' names. That's Billy Wester over there. This is Sam. Sammy's a doctor living in Berkeley, West Virginia. And I'm not helping him out with saying this Blaine Denny, I'll never forget him. He was a real party guy and funny as the dickens. He was a year behind me. And I remember going to Denny's restaurant after I graduated from Randolph-Macon. 3 other guys and I, when I graduated from Randolph-Macon, 2 of whom were from Randolph-Macon, lived up in Baltimore, but we went on a trip out west. That was my graduation present before going to seminary. And not in the convertible, no. This was a car that we bought up in Baltimore. And I went to a Denny's restaurant in Seattle, Washington, and had never been to a Denny's. I'd never even seen a Denny's before. And so I got a copy of the place, the little doily they set out in front of you. And we're doing it.
We're fine.
Okay.
What's been?
Yeah, except I got to be someplace at 5:30. And I sent it to Blaine, and I said, Blaine, this is in honor of you. Spilled some eggs on it or something.
Just in case Vince has to turn something on.
Talked with Dick Heiner not so long ago, when we were doing this fundraising for something here at the college. This toga party was a fun party, what I can recall of it. I don't remember much about it. I guess that was my date, but I'm not sure. And that's not a very nice thing to say. Here's Ed Lilly right here. This guy. Before every party at the Fidel house, we'd all have to go over and really clean it thoroughly. And we would get down, we'd always get the pledges to wax the floor so that, so it would be a good place to dance and carry on.
Now they'd consider that hazing, so we can't do that.
Oh, really? You can't do that anymore?
You
That's
can't
awful.
ask the pledges to do anything you won't do with them.
Ooh, well, that's awful. I can remember a fraternity brother of mine named John Bunsavage. He was from Pennsylvania. God knows where in Pennsylvania. I would have been just as happy had he not come to the college, but he was a year ahead of me, and or maybe 2 years, and I don't think he liked me very much. And he asked me to do something when I was a pledge, and I said, I don't think so, John. And he said, Thompson, bend over, and he got a paddle and whacked me on the rear end, and it stung, and I remember that. And we did things like that. Hell Week was really Hell Week. It was, they took us out. We probably shouldn't even talk about this.
Did you want this off the record?
No.
We'd love to hear it.
Well, I'll tell you, and I think it's safe.
Statute of
It's history.
limitations is over.
Yeah, history, and I don't think they took us out one night, as we knew was going to happen, but they took all the pledges out, 15 of us, and took us out in the country someplace, and they dropped us off, and it was like February. It was cold. Yeah, they dropped us off, and they said, "Find your way back." They drove off down the road, and there was nothing around us except paved road and pasture. And we kept looking at the lights, and we said, well, maybe those are the lights of Ashland over there. And finally we got back to campus, and I don't recall how. We had to wear these burlap bag shirts and with sardines around us. It was really incredibly bad. We all had to sleep on the floor over at the fraternity house.
Okay, now the sardines are new, but
That's
the
right.
road tripping was very standard.
Okay, well, we had to wear sardines. And then you had to wear, in those days, you wore coat and tie to class. So you had to dress for class, and you couldn't shower. They wouldn't let you shower for a week. But,
Oh my God.
The Kappa Alphas continued that particular tradition through the 1980s. We
they
wouldn't
really?
sit by the KAs during pledging. The whole class would be over here, and the Ks would be by the window, and we'd make them sit by the window and open the windows.
is that right?
Through the
Isn't that something?
1980s.
Well, I don't know when the Fidels stopped it, if they ever did.
Before the 80s, the Fidels
Okay.
were much more civilized than the KAs.
The Fidels actually were the leading fraternity on campus when I was here.
I say, and they say you say in your yearbook you had
Yeah.
the highest average.
Yeah, we did. We had the highest academic average, and we had fun, and we partied hard, and raised hell. But at the same time, we knew that we were in college for a purpose, and that was for us, and that we were here, and our parents or other people with scholarships were making it possible for us to be here, and so we really tried to make it quality, and we were. And then I think the Fidels went way down. Unfortunately, I think a lot of them went down when my son was a Fidel. But,
I was going to ask if your children were part of the Greek system.
Yeah, they were. Andrew was a Fidel, more as a legacy, I think, than anything else. and Claire was a Theta. Andrew and Claire, and this is what's neat about Randolph-Macon, have maintained very close contact with 3 or 4 guys or women that they went to college with, which has been good. Kind of interesting for Andrew, he married a girl here in Richmond who was one of a family of 6, and it was two boys and 4 girls. And he married the next to the youngest of the 4 girls. And one of his very best friends here at Randolph-Macon was a guy named Nelson Emery, who they paired up with Anne, Andrew's wife's sister, whose name was Jennifer, who I said, gee, if I didn't know Joanna, Jennifer, I'd be wanting to know you. But anyway, because she was really cute and really fun. And those 2 hit it off and are married, and they have 3 children now. I mean, and that's another thing about the college. In a sense, it's regional in that respect, but, that's all right. That's okay, yeah. And Claire has maintained friendships with, oh, golly, Rachel, I can't think of Rachel's last name, Rachel Woolwine, and a girl named Tiffany, who is now married, and I can't think of Tiffany's last name. But if you look in the annual for 1995, you can see who Rachel is and who Tiffany is, and some of these other girls that Claire stayed in touch with. The girls was by the name of Molly. I know them by their first names and don't ever pay much attention to their last names. But all that's been important to them, and it's given them a real love for this area and for Richmond and for living in Virginia. Mm-hmm.
Do your children come back to Randolph-Macon events? Or it's still a little too close.
Well, no, they come back. They probably came back more right after they graduated, and then once they got married and kind of had family, and they've got soccer and football and all that stuff. That makes it difficult for them to get up here for. We try to encourage them to come to the scholarship dinner. We think that's important.
Your son certainly was here. I remember meeting him last year.
Did you?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay. And Andrew, I think, was on the Young Graduates or whatever it's called, Young Alumni. Whether Claire has ever been or not, I don't know. But I'm laughing because I'm looking at this toga picture. We went on a barefoot cruise one time back in the 1990s, early 1990s. And they don't have them anymore, but because they were never licensed to sail out of the United States, you had to go out of Grenada or one of the places down or St. Martin's, for example. And they were old sailing schooners, and they were a blast. And they had about 100 people on board, and one night they had a toga party. So I'm looking back here and saying, that must have been where it began for me. Thinking to myself. But anyhow.
I have one question.
Sure.
You don't have to answer it if you don't want to. You mentioned one of your classmates and a good friend had died while you were here.
Larry
Was it
Perrin.
Here at the college?
No,
or just in
Larry, they used to have mixers at Mary Washington. And our freshman year, we would go up 2 or 3 times, I guess, in the fall. And you'd go dance with these girls, and they'd, and it was a way to try to, for you to get to know people, And Larry met this nice young lady who, his picture won't be in there, I don't believe. Or is it in there? Is
No,
that?
there was an in memoriam in your class, and the name wasn't ringing a bell.
Hmm.
So you had,
Okay.
you had 2 deaths in
Okay.
your class.
David, I don't remember how David died.
That was, I remember
Okay.
there being an in memoriam, but the name wasn't right.
Larry died in 1962, I'm quite sure. Anyway, he met this girl, and they were going steady, and he and another guy, the name of whom I cannot recall, were driving up in a VW up Route 1, because 95 wasn't in existence, to Mary Washington, and they hit a black spot of ice on the road, black ice, and the car spun out of control, and he was thrown out the back window of a VW. Well, that was the end of Larry. And he was a Phi Delta, and so it was really very sad for us to to experience this. And I think probably for most of us, it was our first real experience